One. All right. Welcome, everyone. This is another episode of the Flyway Focus podcast. I have today with me Dan Johnson, and I am proud to call him a good friend of mine, even though we have met exactly one time in person. And I'm not quite sure about the total amount of hours online playing Age of Empires and talking different related topics. But yeah, it can often go from 9 p.m. to 1 a.m. Things you do when you have kids. So yeah, and gonna keep this fun. Probably aim for around 30 minutes or so. We're gonna learn a little bit about Dan and what makes him tick, and then we're also gonna quickly discuss tariffs at the end. I don't imagine this being too heated at all. We're just gonna talk and discuss and kind of see what the hell anyone knows. And I think we're gonna find out it's not that much, but yeah. Welcome, Dan. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks for having me, man. Dan Johnson, I suppose 35 years old now, or almost 35. I founded a physical therapy company here in Fargo, North Dakota, and then I also do a kind of a nationwide consulting company inside of the healthcare space as well. Been doing that type of stuff or in business for myself for, I suppose, 7, 8 years now. I'm married to my high school sweetheart, and we have 5 kids. Currently, ages about 6 months to 10 years old, which is absolutely wild. I am the type of individual that when I'm doing something, I go all in. If I'm gonna be a physical therapist, I'm gonna be the best physical therapist possible. End up there are many people, specifically males in general, where you just get locked into a specific task that you're doing. And so at times it was like, hey, how to be an insane PT. Other times it was like, hey, how do I crush Christian apologetics? Other times it was like, hey, how do I do philosophy? Most recently has basically all been focused around how to win the actual game of business, specifically how to grow and sell and adapt, specifically healthcare admin has really been where I've been trying to deep dive, and then slowly up, yeah, getting better at other hobbies as well. So
It's awesome. We love to hear it. Thank you for sharing that. Very interesting. You led with your business first rather than your family. My wife would never
al-
let me forget, never
always,
forgive me.
always. Dude, the if you listen to like actual business people on these types of things, they will it's rare that their family even gets a shout out. To be totally honest, it's like almost offensive to bring up your family, where it's like how dare you bring my family into whatever the heck we're doing right now? Like they don't deserve to be called out. So it's less about not loving them, more about almost just like, we'll respect privacy. So.
Yeah, and I think that's very important too, a balance and, especially with the age of internet, there's been crazy people since the beginning of time, but, it's so easy to do a Google search and find out way more about people than, maybe you should know. Like, I do share a lot on my social media, pictures and family and, I'm not like afraid at the moment, but I definitely know people who like, put smiley faces over their kids, which I totally get it. I respect privacy, but also it like to me it looks a little funny. It's like, okay, yes, we want to see it's exciting to see your kid, but like if you're gonna post 100 pictures but block out the face and everyone, it's like, you know, I'm not sure if it's a little vain, and maybe that's overly critical of myself too, but that's just how I look at things, I guess. So,
100%. I think we're mostly in agreement there for sure.
yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
So, all right, cool. Thank you for sharing that about yourself. I think that was an excellent job. Dan, he also did a great job of rotating his camera to show off his wealth of books there. Before we dive into tariffs, are there any books on the shelf that you are proud of, or like maybe don't read, but it's good to have good books
The
alongside?
the the one that I just got done reading, this might be interesting for. I think this podcast is primarily listened to people that play poker with you. I used to say that if I am ever fortunate enough to have lots of money, I'm going to make sure that everyone in my family, specifically children, know I was going to take the Charles Barkley approach to it, which this is my money and you get none of it. You will have access to exactly $0 of this when I die, and have a good one. And I'm slowly moving off of it. And so I actually just read a book up. It's actually I do usually I have a sauna and I'll read in the sauna like a weirdo. And so I finished it last week, but basically it's on structuring family planning in a way that actually makes it so wealth isn't destroyed, and it actually promulgates values that you're proud of. This statistic is absolutely insane. Do you know what percent of families that have like a life-changing amount of money, more or less an amount of money that is impossible for anyone to spend, or if they're intelligent with it, for it like it basically you should never run out of money. What percent of those families have money the third generation in? Any
Oh,
idea?
okay. I think I have heard that statistic and I was going to bring it up. And I don't know, but what I remember is like the second generation, really tough for them to spend it all. But then by the third generation, I'll throw out 20% or something
It
like that.
says, yeah, basically, I want to 30% of families that basically it's like we're not talking about like this is $1 million. Like we're talking it's an amount of money that like is impossible to spend if you're intelligent with it. That if you're just literally living off of interest payments of it, it should be at least high single digits of millions of dollars per year. We're talking at like the absolute lowest, and most likely tens of millions of dollars, if not hundreds of millions of dollars per year. 70% of those family estates and fortunes are destroyed by the third generation, which is absolutely wild.
Right.
And so more or less like looking at what it takes to have that not be the case, and basically it all comes down to like actually being able to instill values in your children is literally what the 150-page book or 175 pages, whatever it is, it was a quick read, was about. And more or less like it actually gave you a million questionnaires on like, hey, this is how to get them to be able to participate in this stuff. But I don't know if I agree with any of it, and I still think it might be more fun just to go light it on fire or build like uh, uh, like the world's greatest church or something like that. Who knows? But who knows? I'm slowly adapting, and maybe I will try and leave it for someone. But if I did, it would almost be like I would have to do something like this where it's like, hey, here's my lecture series
Right.
on like here's my YouTube lecture series on my thoughts on all of these types of things. And I thoroughly expect that like many of you are going to disagree with my thoughts, feelings on a lot of this stuff, but like I want you to know how all of this shit actually happened. And I think that would be important. And so whether it's a YouTube series or actually writing a book or something along those lines, probably something along the lines of like, here's the actual family history and lineage. These are the things that I saw that made certain family members successful. These are the things that I saw that destroyed certain family members. These are the things that have probably been most relevant in my success in my life. And these are the things that almost assuredly, if I had allowed them to control me more, would have destroyed me. Would probably be like that type of stuff that I would attempt to leave. And because again, they're you know half of you, and who knows how many generations down, what percent of of myself they would be. But yeah, it is what it is. So that would be the current book that I just rolled through, and I'm three-fourths of the way through the Two Towers again, and I've been plugging at that one actually way too long, but neither here nor there.
That's good. No, I think that's great. You shared a lot of great thoughts that I agree with because like you know, I think we're both wealthy, and without going into details, you probably have a little bit more, but like you want to leave your kids with the best situation that you can, but you also don't want to like, if you think of like movie Trust Fund Baby, and I'm not sure of anyone's movies that are good examples. One is actually Rain Man, if you've seen that one, like how Tom Cruise, his dad's extremely wealthy and he doesn't give him money to for his car, and then he just like jets up. That's still not a good example, but I don't think we are in a
The the
position
the
we're
the,
not in a
the
position to have like a child who like literally doesn't have to work, like you want them to children to learn good values and succeed mostly on their own, but also provide a safety net for them in case things aren't going smoothly or something like that.
Yeah, yeah, the quintessential example that people like to use is the Vanderbilts, where it's very possible that Cornelius Vanderbilt, I forget what he was worth, but in like today's money, it was like 700 billion or just something absurd. End up the last kid who didn't get a trust fund, or like the first kid to not get a trust fund, was Anderson Cooper. Which again, like probably polarizing whether you're Democrat, Republican, but like he was the most successful Vanderbilt since literally the like Cornelius, I think
Yeah.
is what it was. You know, we're talking like they had a line of 100 years of shitheads and finally got one that was able to do something mildly useful with their life solely by virtue of being the first one that didn't have access to money. You know, it's wild, but neither here nor there.
Crazy, crazy. Well, I wasn't sharing my screen with you earlier, Dan, so if you are able to click on that and you can kind of see what I got going on, and if you can let me know if you're seeing my main screen or not with
Oh, I can see. We got it.
yeah, nice. Nice. So, okay, no, I think that was a good point with children, setting them up for success and yeah, lots of good things there. So, yeah, let's move on over to tariffs. We're already 10 minutes in here. So, let's just talk a little bit about what I think I know about tariffs because I've become an expert in the last week,
I'm
and
an absolute god as well. You want to know about rare earth minerals as well? Like, there's no one who has more information than I do on that right
right,
now.
right.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, part of that Dunning-Kruger effect. And so like yeah, so I want to talk about why, the purpose or why I think tariffs are bad, and then I think I want to talk about well, first we'll talk what tariffs are, like what are the pros and cons. Then I will talk like why tariffs are bad, and then I'll go like the optimistic case. But maybe you want to start us off and tell us what you think tariffs are. I can start first, but
I will start and just say this. I'll let you take the wheel. There's a famous book out there that we were forced to read in epistemology class. Epistemology is like the study of knowledge. It's a famous, very, very, very famous book, but specifically, it's called On Bullshit, written by Harry Frankfurt. And the overarching premise is like it's much better to deal with a liar than a bullshitter. And what we're doing here probably firmly falls into the bullshitting category. And the issue becomes on like when it's bullshit versus a lot like liars care about the truth more or less they care about hiding it, and people who are telling the truth care about the truth. But like when you are actively talking and trying to promulgate on something that like is really like we're talking like actually industry specific, domain specific knowledge on this is so difficult. It becomes difficult for both parties to not start bullshitting, and I know that that is a problem that I am often accused of. So if I start doing it, I apologize, and at least I'm somewhat aware.
all good, all good. So yeah, okay. I'll share what I think and now kind of believe about tariffs. So once again, like I've been aware of tariffs, but I've never dealt in international commerce or, anything of that nature. So my like base level knowledge is like very infinitesimally small. But basically, so like we'll talk about free trade right away. So I'll just use the United States and we'll just say Vietnam. All right. So Vietnam is like a relatively poor country with lots of, underdeveloped. And so we as the United States, like, I think obviously you want to build as much as you can with if you think about absolute or competitive advantage, going back to basic economics, competitive means or absolute means you can make it cheaper than, the other country no matter what basically. But I think competitive and I can like Google this here quickly, but competitive means like listen, maybe the US can like make cheap socks pretty well, but like in Vietnam we just have a lot of poor uneducated people, so we're going to have them make socks and you in the United States focus on software and building airplanes and stuff like that and that generally works out over well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I'm picking up what you're putting down, and
Yeah.
I don't yeah, it doesn't. In my estimation, it doesn't seem like we're trying to bring sock factories back to the U.S. But it seems like we're trying to bring like nuclear submarine factories back to the U.S. or even like you're seeing a lot of those. Are you familiar with dark factories in China nowadays?
Yeah, yeah,
Like
and
it's it
I'll touch base in there, but we'll
okay.
kinda get this
Yeah.
main so, like,
Yeah,
we
no,
have
for sure.
so we have tariffs, and then we hear about the deficit quite a bit, and, we could go into that further and, like, different trade balances, but basically, if we're trading with Vietnam and we have this trade surplus, it's probably because Vietnam, first, they're, like, poor as shit, but they're getting better, but, think of any of these countries, Bangladesh, or, like just you have tons of people, they live in huts and chickens running around. And so you have them making textiles and all these cheap goods because they have people who are like, literally it's agriculture or bust. And like, we can get into the merits of like, listen, agriculture living is great, but like, if you don't have money to like take care of your child when they're sick or poor, or maybe you want a car to impress a girlfriend, things like that, that's kind of how trade is supposed to work and create upward mobility and relieve poverty. So I kind of understand like we run a trade deficit. And so like part of that with the trade balance, I believe, is so like, we're gonna buy all these cheap socks from Vietnam because, they're cheap, we can make them, and like we're a rich country, so we can afford to do that. So basically with all these like cheap countries, it's gonna be im virtually impossible for us to have like a positive trade balance because they're so poor to buy our good goods. And I'll just briefly touch on
Agreed.
like yeah. And
Agreed.
so
Completely agree. And it seems like the way that the Trump presidency, cabinet, whatever, set it up is based off of trade balance, not actually reciprocal trade tariffs on stuff. So
right.
again, if someone's trying to pull a fast one and get like, it makes sense to maybe try and make things match. But you're completely correct that there's certain places like, hey, what like is there an imbalance between us and like Nigeria? It's like, yeah, they import all of our coffee or something. Like I made up the country,
Yeah,
but it's like,
yeah,
what do we import to them? We import dick to them.
yeah,
Obviously, there's going to be a trade imbalance. And you are correct. Places like Bangladesh, Vietnam, and like a lot of the places in Vietnam as well. Like we're talking that people are fleeing China because it used to be like the low cost area of the world, and they had an absurd amount of people. Their average age is above 50 now, and like it's no longer low cost. And so they're actively trying to move into like hyper technically dark factories, things of that nature. It sounds like they might actually be able to make semiconductors less than I think .03 microns at some point here as well. Like it looks like they're actually getting those factories up and going, and who knows if that's true or not. But like that would actually have them compete with TSMC. So a lot of the cheap manufacturing is going to places like Vietnam, Bangladesh, etc., and it's less about China, even though that seems to be the major thing that we want to talk about with tariffs.
right, right. Nope, all good points once again, and I'll try to circle back. There's a lot here because I do want to touch
No,
base on where I think tariffs are justified. So I think part of the reason, like, of Trump's allure is like, listen, he's that injury lawyer, like you see them on billboards everywhere, like, we're gonna fight for you, we're gonna stick it to these like um, big corporations and the enemies basically. And so part of that is like trade imbalance or the big deficits, and probably like more importantly you know the the debt load of the government currently, like because that is kind of frustrating. And so like the way to figure our government deficit spending is like maybe to fix this trade balance, which at first glance makes sense, but really what the trade deficit, or not the trade deficit, the government spending is, we spend more on like interest payments and military and especially Social Security and Medicare. So like, I think the trade imbalance is like not as should not be as high of a priority as compared to like working with these other things, Medicare, Social Security, and just spending less. So, anyways, so to get to tariffs and what else I think about them. So, um, I just need a second here to gather my thoughts. So yeah, anyways, I think Trump's like big push, like he literally dodged a bullet. And so he's like, listen, I been given a mandate to like remake and help this country in ways that I deem fit. And like, that's why he's not listening to like the economists and blah blah blah. And so like and if you go back and you can read on some of these Substacks I've read, like he's always believed in tariffs, and people have taken him like
Yep.
seriously on his views on tariffs, but not literally. And what he's come up with has been like a huge, apparently the biggest tariff since like the Great Depression, basically, the
Holly Smoot, yeah.
Holly Smoot. So like, I'm like trying to educate myself. I was trying to tune myself out of what was going on in the daily Trump administration. But when the stock market is down 15%, from year to date, you got to pay attention. So, all right, help myself not get lost in the weeds here. So back to like US and Vietnam, you want to like import goods and like, which is great. Like 'cause Vietnam can make all this stuff cheap, and that is like really good for the United States. But the one other thing, and you'll hear this a lot, especially with like the Rust Belt and China being added to the WTO in the, 90s or whenever that was, like all of a
Yep.
sudden you have a billion people. These are like poor ass farmers. They're looking to um, go in these factories and be able to send money back to their families, like, and like how can you fault these people for wanting to better their lives per se? But when you open these up, like, then all of a sudden, like, the sock maker, who probably is, there's not very many, but if you were a sock maker or textiles, especially in the United States, like, you went bankrupt, because how can you compete with people getting paid pennies per hour? And so like there's definitely some frustration, and you can go back to, like, you'll hear the popular narrative of the Rust Belt being hollowed out, or like, there's big depopulation in Detroit and Cleveland and, Ohio and things of that nature. And, I think, like, would you agree with that? Like China being brought
Yeah.
into the WTO really,
It would seem, based off of my understanding, that like those things definitely negatively impacted those areas, but to what extent is so hard to say. Were they going to go out anyway? Who knows? The one thing that I do know, that bringing them into the World Trade Organization, is that it allowed them to more or less be able to stall a lot of the proceedings, and they're the major ones that use intellectual property theft, which is the major thing that's kind of disputed in the like that with world trade stuff, as well as like just tariffs in general. And so what you end up having is you can have like, hey, did the Chinese state sponsor DeepSeek R1? We don't know. Probably, but we really don't know. Are they currently subsidizing all of the Chinese car makers? Probably, but we don't know. Now, what happens when the Chinese electric car makers that can do things cooler, like that can do things better slash cooler than what, say, Tesla can, and they can sell them for a third of the price? What does that do? Like that's clearly not good for free trade. And so you need a strong World Trade Organization to be able to step in and do that, but it's been very much neutered in that like they would start selling in the US, and then you would have to take it up in the court, and it would be 3, 4, 5 years later that you're actually going to get a verdict on that type of stuff. So you're fucked at that point if you since they were admitted in that way, is at least my current understanding, which again is limited as hell. But that was probably the major problem with admitting them into the World Trade Organization, that
yeah.
like they get to participate in all bunch of intellectual property theft left and right, followed by there is recourse for it, but it's after all of the other companies are now dead, so it doesn't matter about what happened. So again, neither here nor there.
No, I think that's really good. So I'm gonna work on my point here, because I feel like you get direction, and especially not being a pro
Yeah.
expert here. But so yeah, I agree with that. And so another layer, so like obviously, like, we don't want our kids to be in sock and shoe factories, so like I feel like those are good ones to chip out and get from Vietnam, Bangladesh, and like China especially.
Uh,
And so like we get all
Agreed.
these cheap goods, which is fantastic. And so then we see China grow into a behemoth. And big problem, I think, is, so in China, you have all this like technology boom, a ton of goods, but what they don't have is their own stock market is like dog shit, because they, always reinvest and like subsidize these companies to continue to produce cheap shit. And
and,
so,
and and their company is dog shit by virtue of like Jack Ma's the poster boy. That
Yep.
the moment he tries to get a brain, they
Yep.
go, hey Jack, looks like you're gonna either get a lobotomy or take up like painting
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
nether regions of China, and no one's gonna hear from you for 5 years. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
they
he
have
was
no,
basically China's Elon. So another
yeah,
reason why China has these like unfair practices is because they don't allow these imports to come into their country. And so they're like buying all these like, treasury bonds, which is actually like good for the United States, but they're not allowing US companies to you know, sell in China, like, build and then ship over. And there's all these rules, or even like Facebook and Google have to be heavily censored in order to even
yeah.
operate there. So now to get to the point where I think tariffs can actually make sense. So like here we have these like car companies or semiconductors. So like, yes, you want to bring your socks and cheap clothes across the ocean, that's fine. But if you start I think the United States, what they ended up doing is they would like, 'cause China has all this cheap labor, they're really good at manufacturing, like really good. So then these companies, send their, General Electric or Volkswagen or any car dealers, they'll get over there in China, they'll build factories, and they call it like the China cycle. Basically, foreign companies invest, they build up their factories, they make lots of money, but then all of a sudden China like the law is to like share technology between government and these companies like freely. Like there's no like trade secrets for foreign companies in China. Like if you're operating in China, you need to share what you know. And so you see these companies like kind of get hollowed out, and then all of a sudden the Chinese government will end up funding these competitors, and then they go out of business once there's no more like IP or technology to steal, kind of what you discussed earlier. And so like one reason, like one helpful way to like tariffs is like, okay, China, like in theory, you're going, you can sell your products here, but you're going to have to build in our country. And I think that's kind of what actually happened with like Toyota, Honda, and a lot of these Japanese car maker companies and stuff like that. They built very good vehicles, but the US government was like, hey, we want American jobs for these vehicles that you're creating. And so that like incentivize manufacturing to come over to the United States. And I think, in a perfect world, that's what would happen due to these Trump tariffs. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, 100%. I'm picking up what you're putting down, big dog.
And so I think what the the reason why things won't work basically is like tariffs are a tax. And here, I'll just read this Ronald Reagan quote here. It says, you see, at first, when someone says, let's impose tariffs on foreign imports, it looks like they're doing the patriotic thing by protecting American products and jobs. And sometimes for a short while, it works, but only for a short time. What eventually occurs is first, homegrown industries start relying on government protection in the form of high tariffs. They stop competing and stop making innovative management and technological changes they need to succeed in world markets. And then, while all this is going on, something even worse occurs. High tariffs inevitably lead to retaliation by foreign companies and the triggering of fierce trade wars. The result is more and more tariffs, higher and higher trade barriers, and less competition. So soon, because of the prices made artificially high by tariffs that subsidize inefficiency and poor management, people stop buying. Reagan concluded then the worst happens. Markets shrink and collapse, businesses and industries shut down, and millions of people lose jobs. And this was a quote I had never heard. I know, like I'm starting to see some prominent Democrats really start to beat the drum of Ronald Reagan. So that's been an interesting transformation. And like that quote makes a lot of sense to me, even though I had not read about it until,
I
the
th- w-
last week. And so my final point is like Americans hate paying taxes. Like, yes, they help go to like, help grandpa be able to afford apartments so he doesn't go homeless, and like some, support defense industries, which is good. But generally, it's like, God, people complain about taxes. I get it. And tariffs is a tax like that. And it's really tough to enforce these tariffs because, like, taxes, we know tax dodgers, and it happens more than we think. Now imagine a government that totally um, trying to evade these tariffs. So like China will actually build factories in Mexico and other countries and try to like use shell companies to get through. So then we end up like spending all this money on trying to regulate and tax, but most of it ends up falling through the cracks. So that's kind of the gist of why tariffs ultimately end up failing. Once
Yep.
again, in my limited understanding.
Yeah, no, I too saw the Reagan quote a couple times this week actually. And the thing that's funny is I would say that like on this issue, it's probably more of the Republican stance in general to be anti-tariff. And I would say a lot of the things that Trump promotes are very, very more left leaning in nature, which is funny that like I don't think either political party actually knows what they're standing on anymore, to
Yeah,
be
it's
totally
almost like
honest.
a flip-flop going on, and it's
It,
very, very interesting to see.
everyone's flip-flopped on like half of the issues, and it's very, very strange to me. So I was a never Trumper for a long time. I've discussed with you that like
Yeah,
I switched probably about a month prior to the election. It was the combination of the Al Smith dinner and the Joe Rogan podcast that I went, you know what, this guy like probably isn't going to destroy the world if given access to the nuclear codes. It didn't happen the first time.
right.
The thing that's strange though is like it's one of the like in both election cycles or almost every election cycle that Trump has been in, the amount of I don't know if it's people can't read what's going on in the voter's mind or it's outright lies that's happening. And so in certainly in the mind of Trump at least, the media tells outright lies about him and attempts to conflate things against him. And by virtue of that, like as well as the assassination, and literally he just has this like fuck all mentality where it's like, whatever, I am doing whatever I want, and everyone can scream and cry about it. Because frankly, they were screaming and crying and like saying all of these terrible things when nothing was happening in all of these other situations. So I feel like I have a mandate. I'm going for it. The issue is like I think a lot of the stuff that he's doing should like receive nonpartisan support. Like maybe like say which that certainly Doge has done certain things that like maybe will end up poorly, but like for the most part, what's the overarching thought process behind it? Like, hey, it seems like we could run this guy more efficiently. Let's do that. Like Democrats and Republicans should both be like, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's actually try and prevent fraud, waste, and abuse, and let's see if we can get this together. Or like you it's difficult to know what level of like an anti-vax or RFK is, but simultaneously the thought process that they have in looking at that, which is something to the extent of like, hey, the United States is only getting more and more unhealthy, and yet we spend more and more on healthcare. Like, what the hell's actually going on? And it seems like they're trying to target food systems, which I personally think makes a lot of sense. And frankly, that's something that only a bunch of lunatic liberals would get behind, to be totally honest. And like somehow it became a MAGA base thing. It's very strange. And so all of this is to say, like, I don't think he can actually see what's bullshit versus what's not bullshit due to him just understanding that, or in his mind, everyone lies all of the time to him about everything. And like, that's a really rough position to be in. So he's literally just going with his gut. And like, he's had this tariff idea since basically Vietnam, and he's running with it. And, it's like, whatever. I was shot at. God wants me alive, and I'm getting this tariff stuff railroaded down people's throats, and like I don't know if it's going to turn out good or bad. Based off of the intelligent people that I know, I like to listen to a political analyst named Peter Zion, and he seems to think that it's a friggin' terrible idea that only a moron would do. Someone like Ben Shapiro thinks it's an absolutely horrific idea. The guys on the All In podcast are a little bit more pro, but like it's really, really difficult to know. And like, frankly, I don't understand microeconomics well enough to get it. I don't understand macroeconomics well enough to get it. I'm jacked up about the stock market tanking, which only a real asshole would say. But like, I'm put money in, I suppose, but outside of that, like, I really don't understand what is truly going on, and I don't. If we're getting 4D chess, I don't see it, because Trump really does telegraph everything that he's doing. It's like, hey, we're gonna bomb Yemen because they're a bunch of friggin' terrorists. Like, great, that seems very straightforward. I like it. You know, we're going to put RFK in charge because we're way sicker than we used to be, and we should probably look into that. Seems very telegraphed to me, and so I it seems like the tariff stuff is being telegraphed, and it seems to me that no one's telegraphing the same message, which doesn't feel like it's super well thought out. So,
All right. Well, thank you for that good monologue there.
yes.
Lots of good points. I disagree with some, but we're a lot of good information and love hearing your thoughts there. So, I guess all I really have to say is like, if this was a Democrat doing this, like everyone would be in up in arms. And I think it's really confusing right now why we would want to tank the stock market, especially when he bragged about doing so well in the stock market in his first term. So, yeah, I guess my thoughts for what are going to happen. So we're at 35 minutes, so we'll give it a few more here and get some final closing thoughts in. But basically, we have this tariffs. It's trying to upend a lot of things that have been pretty steady since World War II. Whether it's like devaluing the dollar, which I get, that would make our sports at least more appealing. We could go into that there. But basically, there are a lot of real benefits for the United States being the center hub for finance. Like, everything is done in dollars throughout the world, and there's a lot of advantages to that. And obviously, not to everyone, but like overall, like that really helps us like have a lot of sway, being stable and things like that. And if we like blow up the system, I think there's going to be a lot of unintended, unforeseen consequences, and actually maybe foreseen like real bad. But um, and that'll be really tough to get back. It's not going to be like a switch where we can flip. But my view of what's going to happen here is like, obviously Democrats are against this, and I'm very confident like tanking the stock market or inflation, especially if we get stagflation going on now where growth stagnates and inflation goes up, that will also lose a lot of the moderates. And really, if Trump's plan was to be in fact, and like, because it would take a long time to get all this manufacturing sent back to the US. And if our economy is bad, like, do countries really want to invest in the United States? That's a whole nother thing. And we just don't have the unskilled labor force to take all this on either. So that's
Agreed.
another point. So basically, I think what'll happen is like if Trump's plan were to go through, and even best case scenario, this would take several years. And if there's anything that Americans can agree on is they want things better now. And so I think
Yeah.
like in 15 months, Democrats, the markets are going to start pricing in at least a Democratic takeover in the House. They're only six behind right now, and we could see some Senate seats be in play. Democrats have really been on the back foot for a while, but they could put into play North Carolina, Florida, and I would even venture to say Texas. That is a very booming economy. And if you start to tell people like, hey, we got to toughen up, you can't buy your stuff at the dollar store anymore, I think people are going to
Yep.
be upset. So,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
like we're both like relatively, not like super wealthy, but we don't have to count paycheck to paycheck. And where you have a lot of poor Americans who swung really towards Trump and Republicans this last year, they're not that wealthy, and they're really gonna notice things like $12 eggs at the store, and if they can't get their cheap China party makers and just like overconsume like every good American, they're gonna like notice that. So I think that could change a lot in the 2 years, and if that happens, that could turn Trump into a lame duck president. But and then the final thoughts, like currently Republicans in Congress are trying to pass this large tax bill that would like shift a lot of the tax burden, in my opinion, to the middle class and poor for the discounts for corporations to promote more business once again. So that would like add to the deficit even more. And with if the stock market's already suffering this much, it's going to be very interesting. So I th- I think this next week is going to be very interesting, and I would put money on the market being down 5 to 10% next week. If anyone's up to take that position. So
I agree. The market's probably going to be down to 5 to 10%. I'm throwing a large amount in. I think 8 a.m. on Monday morning. To be totally honest, just because like I'm not in the market right now. All of my stuff is fully out, and so again, always a question of
yep.
when to. to catch the falling knife. But neither here nor there.
Yeah, yeah.
But
Best of luck with that, and I hope
I
it turns out
think
well for you. Because
this well, it should turn out well in 60 years when I care. So neither here nor there. But we'll see what happens with all of it. The one thing I will say regarding the stock market is like tariffs. No one has any idea how it's actually going to affect Main Street for the most part. It's currently destroying the stock market, but the average American, I really don't think it matters. Like the economies are not getting destroyed with it, and will the tariffs import a
I think when people
recession
start losing their
for us?
jobs, that'll be a big deal. So it's
The
just
but it just as far as like we only export recessions. We've never imported one from the rest of the world, and like nothing seems in my mind, at least ontologically, changing when it comes to our actual economy as it currently sits. It's just we're seeing a ton of fluctuation in this type of stuff, and no one's there's a ton of uncertainty with what's going to happen. Are tariffs going to stick? Are they not? And like the markets are definitely reflecting that right now, and people are pulling positions in certain things, trying to put positions in it. Like it's very, very, very difficult to know what's what at this point. And so I don't think the stock market as a whole is indicative of the economy as a whole. But neither here nor there.
yeah. I disagree, but like I don't know how to argue my position about that at the
I
moment. So
I understand. I think Rubio made that point today, actually.
all right, well, I think that's a good point to end at this point. So thank you for discussing this with me for 40 minutes. I hope our listeners learn a little bit more about yourself. You can share with friends. I think we kept it pretty tame and um, family friendly, I guess, in a sense. So, and
I I hate promoting myself in these types of ways. I will share this with exactly zero people.
well, I'll
No,
make sure
no,
Alex
no.
and Jake Schmies get to see it. So,
There we go. Love it. Love it.
all right, thanks again, and I'll stop the recording. So.